Mr. Alexander. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call please be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to speak for up to 10 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today, as I have over the past year and a half, as a physician who's practiced medicine in Wyoming for a quarter of a century, get home every weekend, visit with my former patients, my former colleagues, and as I talk to people around the state of Wyoming about the health care law, the newly passed health care law, their concerns are those that we've heard from around the country and certainly here on the Senate floor. And that's why I keep coming back to the Senate floor with a doctor's second opinion about the health care law. Because what we know patients would like in terms of health care is that they get the care they need from a doctor that they want at a cost that they can afford. And for many, many people across this country, the cost that they can afford is a major, major issue, which is why I think so many people were happy to hear the President in his initial talk about what he was proposing for health care in this country. He said we need to get the cost of health care down. And he said if his bill were to pass and become law, the cost of care, he said, would drop about $2,500 per family across the United States. That's what people were looking forward to. And in so many ways, the President overpromised and underdelivered. Because what people have seen is the cost of their care has continued to go up as a result of the President's health care law. The states around the country are now looking at ways to deal with this health care law. Many states have set up committees to deal with that based on their state legislatures, and we have done the same thing in my home state of Wyoming. In Wyoming, we've asked for a study to be done to take a look at what the impacts of the President's health care law would be on health care and the cost of care in our state. And a report was authored by a Massachusetts group called Gorman Actuarial. It examined how the health reform law passed last year by Congress is going to affect the state of Wyoming specifically. This information is being used in Wyoming by our Health Benefits Exchange Steering Committee. That's the committee which is reviewing various options for a state-run health exchange. And that's what people are looking at. What is the best thing to do for our state? Well, as they've come upon this work effort, what they are telling us is about the individual market for insurance. People that end up buying insurance individually, having to go out, don't get it necessarily through work, in different ways, that they have to buy the insurance on the individual market. This report says that in Wyoming, as a result of the health care law, the current individual market enrollees will see average premiums increase by 30% to 40% based on the components of the law. Now, some supporters of the law say, well, they're going to get more insurance than they would otherwise. And that is true because they are going to get a government-mandated amount of insurance, which may be a lot more insurance that they want or that they need, which is one of the fundamental problems of this health care law, government-mandated levels of insurance. Many people in Wyoming feel they don't want that level of care, which is why I believe individuals should be able to opt out of this provision of the health care law. States ought to be able to opt out. States, individuals ought to be able to receive a waiver, but right now that is not happening. So what we're seeing in Wyoming is a significant increase in the cost, not the decrease that the President promised, but an increase in the cost of health insurance beyond what it would have gone up had there not been a health care law at all. And yet I talk to young people around the state, and I've met with a number of young people from my state just the other evening, and they asked about this and how it's going to affect the young. Well, what we see is that their rates are going to go up quite a bit. And a lot has to do with the fact that the lowest amount you can end up charging someone who's young, and then you compare that to someone who is older, the ratio is 3 to 1. So for someone who is not very healthy and older, they will only be paying 3 times what a younger person will be paying based on what passed this House and this Senate, which means that for those younger people, they're going to pay a lot more than they necessarily would based on their own good health, exercise habits, fitness, diet, and in terms of what their real costs ought to be insured. And so I guess it's not a surprise when we saw the election results coming out of the state of Ohio Tuesday a few weeks ago about the specific individual mandate that said everyone has to buy insurance. On that day, on Election Day in Ohio, 66% of the voters said they didn't want this government mandate, a mandate that you must buy government-approved insurance. They don't want that to apply to them. Two-thirds of the people of Ohio on Election Day voted against the mandate, which is not unusual to see because we've seen that across the country. We've seen that in Missouri last year on balloting day. We saw it as they do national polls. This health care law is less popular now than it was the day it was signed. People continue to want to be able to get out of underneath the health care law, which is why I continue to come to the Senate floor week after week with a doctor's second opinion as more information becomes available, just as this study in Wyoming has become available. Because the President's promise, if you like what you have, you can keep it. We're finding out that's not true. And the fact that the President promised that health care premiums would drop for families by $2,500 per family is not true. And that's why I continue to believe that this health care law is bad for patients. It's bad for providers, the nurses and the doctors who take care of those patients. And it's bad for the taxpayers of this great country. That's why it is time to repeal and replace this broken health care law. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Unanimous consent, the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of Amendments 1125 and 1126, which have been offered by the Intelligence Committee Chairwoman, Senator Feinstein. While the Senate did not pass my amendment that would have instructed the Senate to consider these detainee matters separately from the Defense Authorization Bill, I believe that Senator Feinstein's amendments make important changes and improvements to the bill, improvements that may yet avoid a problem with a presidential veto. So, Mr. President, and I thank the presiding officer for his comments yesterday on the detainee provisions that are in this proposed legislation. I want to urge my colleagues to support these amendments, and I want to be clear, I intend to support them. Now, I have serious concerns going forward about the unintended consequences of enacting the detainee provisions in Subtitle D of the Defense Authorization Act. These amendments help to alleviate some of my concerns. And I would like to, in the context of the debate we're having, note that in addition to the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, the Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper, and FBI Director Mueller, who all oppose the detainee provisions, CIA Director Petraeus' senior staff has indicated that they, too, oppose the detention provisions. The CIA believes that it's important to preserve the current U.S. government's prosecution flexibility that has allowed both the Bush and the Obama administrations to effectively combat those who seek to do us harm. After the vote yesterday, I had a chance to talk, Mr. President, with a number of members on the other side of the aisle and, frankly, on the other side of the debate, because this has had bipartisan support on both sides of the debate. But the folks I talked to told me they didn't support my amendment but they were still interested in making some more targeted changes to the detention provisions, and I hope that those colleagues will take a close look at what Senator Feinstein is offering here today. Let me speak to specifically what she would help resolve with her amendments. There are two important shortcomings that still exist in the current bill. One of her amendments would preserve the flexibility of the military, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies to collaborate without undue limitation in any investigation, interrogation, and prosecution of suspected terrorists. The other amendment would make it clear that American citizens cannot be held indefinitely in military detention without trial. Again, I know the presiding officer spoke powerfully to that very legitimate and important concern yesterday. The current language in the bill, which is why I took to the floor yesterday and on a number of other occasions to make this point, I believe will disrupt the investigation, interrogation, and prosecution of terrorist suspects by forcing the military to interrupt what the FBI, the CIA, or other counterterrorism agency operations against each of these organizations' recommendations, including the military's. In sum, we're going to create an unworkable bureaucratic process that would take away the intelligence community and the counterterrorism community's capabilities to make critical and in some cases split-second decisions about how best to save Americans' lives. And further, Mr. President, I can't emphasize this enough. Although my friends on the other side of the debate argue otherwise, the detainee provisions do allow for the indefinite military detention of American citizens who are accused of planning or participating in terror attacks. Simply accused. That cuts directly against values that we hold dear. Innocent until proven guilty, presumption of innocence. That's why this is such an important debate. Now, let me be clear. There are American citizens who've collaborated with our enemies. There are American citizens who participated in attacks against our soldiers and civilians. Those Americans are traitors. They should be dealt with. And we already have a system for ensuring that they're brought to justice and made to pay a very heavy price for their crimes. And that system is working. However, even in the darkest hours, we must ensure that our Constitution prevails. We do ourselves a grave disservice by allowing for any citizen to be locked up indefinitely without trial, no matter how serious the charges may be against them. Doing so may be politically expedient, but we risk losing our principles in justice and liberty that have kept our republic strong, and it does nothing to make us safer. Our national security leadership has even said that if we implement these provisions, it could make us less safe. Mr. President, if I might reflect a bit on what we've learned, at least in three different wars, three wars that we all learn about in our history classes, the Civil War, World War I, and World War II. As we look back at those three wars, we made the decision and we drew the conclusion as Americans that we overreached, that we constricted civil liberties. President Lincoln limited habeas corpus in the Civil War. I know the presiding officer is familiar with the Palmer raids during World War I and the aftermath of World War I. Of course, we know all too well the history of the internment of Japanese Americans. I'm not suggesting that these provisions, as they're now included in the bill, would result in historians drawing those similar kinds of conclusions 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. But why not be safe? Why not take the time to ensure that we keep faith with those core values that make America what it is? That's all I'm asking. I think that's all that Senator Feinstein is asking for us to do. That's what the 38 senators who joined us yesterday to vote for my common sense approach were saying as well. So in sum, Senator Feinstein has introduced some small changes that would help alleviate some of the justifiable concerns with these provisions. As I have said, I continue to worry that there will be unintended consequences to enacting the detainee provisions altogether. However, we can make some of these small improvements to avoid harming our counterterrorism activities and preventing the loss of rights and freedoms granted to all Americans by our Constitution. So in closing, Mr. President, I urge all of our colleagues to support Senator Feinstein's amendments.
President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, just briefly while my friend from Colorado is on the floor, he said take the time. We've been taking time, I tell the senator from Colorado, since September 11, 2001, when the United States of America was attacked. We passed the Detainee Treatment Act. We've passed other pieces of legislation, the Patriot Act, others. Take the time. I say in all due respect that we have taken a lot of time. In fact, hundreds and hundreds of hours of debate, discussion as to how to address this threat to the United States of America. Now, if the senator from Colorado supports the Feinstein Amendment, I agree with that. I cannot agree that we have not taken the time. I personally have taken, I cannot tell you, untold hours addressing this issue of how we treat detainees. And we may have a fundamental disagreement, but I do reject the argument that we haven't taken the time. I yield the floor.
Would the senator respond to a questioner? I have, as the senator knows from Arizona, I have utmost respect for the time that you've spent in this very important area. I think what I've been trying to say is that in regards to this particular set of detainee provisions, I want to ensure that all of the questions that the FBI Director, General Clapper, Secretary Panetta, and others have raised about how these provisions would actually be applied. I have no question that the intent is spot on. I just am aware that there have been some concerns raised about how these new provisions would actually be applied. And I think Senator Feinstein's amendments, and I don't know where the senator from Arizona stands at this point, may provide some greater clarification. I know there have been some conversations on the floor as to how we will deal with these amendments. So I appreciate the senator's comments. And
I thank the senator from Colorado's clarification, and I think I understand more clearly the rationale for his support of the amendment. I yield the floor.
President, I yield the floor as well, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Senator from North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak on behalf of the North American Energy Security Act of 2011. Now, this is legislation that I am sponsoring along with Senator Lugar, Senator Vitter, Senator Johans, and 37 other co-sponsors. We already have 37 co-sponsors on this legislation. This is a solutions-oriented bill that addresses concerns along the route of the Keystone Pipeline. Keystone Pipeline is designed to carry 700,000 barrels a day of oil from Alberta, Canada, from the oil sands area in Canada to refineries in the United States, both along the Gulf Coast, both in Texas and Louisiana. This is a $7 billion high-tech pipeline that will make a huge difference for our country, both in terms of energy security, but also job creation. Now, this is a project, Keystone Pipeline, actually a project that I've been working on for quite some time, formerly as governor of the state of North Dakota, and now as part of this body, the United States Senate. There already exists a pipeline called the Keystone Pipeline, which was built by TransCanada, goes from Alberta, Canada, all the way down to our refineries. That pipeline runs through the eastern part of North Dakota and on down to Patuca, Illinois, and other locations as well, bringing approximately 600,000 barrels a day of Canadian crude into the United States. The Keystone XL project would also be constructed by TransCanada, and it would come down from the Alberta area in Canada down just along North Dakota's western border in eastern Montana and go on down to Cushing and, as I said, to the refineries along the Gulf Coast. In addition to bringing Canadian crude into the United States, it would also pick up crude along the way, crude produced here in North Dakota. For example, in my home state of North Dakota, we'll add 100,000 barrels a day of light sweet crude produced in the Williston Basin in North Dakota and Montana into that pipeline. So it's also designed to move our domestic crude to refineries as well. Now, this is an important project that's been in the permitting process for 3 years. It's been going through the NEPA process, seeking an environmental impact statement and approval not only of EPA but of our State Department for 3 years. And we need to get it going because it's not only about reducing our dependence on oil from the Middle East, Venezuela, and other places in the world that are not friendly to the United States, but it's also a huge job creator. This project is a big-time job creator. We're talking about a $7 billion investment to build the pipeline. We're talking about 20,000 construction jobs right away. We're talking about 250,000 jobs over time. We're talking about $600 million in tax revenue to states and other localities. This is a huge project, and we need to get it going. We particularly need to get it going at a time when we have 9% unemployment in our economy, more than 14 million people looking for work. So we need it to get that economic activity going. We need it to get people back to work. We need it for energy security. We need this project to reduce our dependence on oil from the Mideast. So where's the project right now? Well, the latest issue that had been raised as far as not getting approval for the project from the Department of State was that the state of Nebraska had environmental concerns, that the pipeline, this 1,700-mile pipeline running from the oil sands in Canada all the way down to our refineries, that in its route through the state of Nebraska, that it was going through an area that was environmentally sensitive and that would create a problem. It's the High Plains area, the Sandhills area of Nebraska.
And the concern was that with the Ogallala aquifer underlying that area and the irrigation for that farming and ranching region, that pipeline route was a problem. And in fact, there was opposition in the state of Nebraska to the project for that reason. However, working with the company TransCanada and with the state of Nebraska, we have addressed that issue. Recently, the state of Nebraska had a special session. Governor Dave Heineman called a special session in Nebraska. They held the session and they came up with a plan through their Department of Environmental Quality, working with the EPA to reroute the project in the state of Nebraska. And on the basis of that rerouting and going through the approval process they developed between the state and federal government, in essence, on that basis, they've now addressed that concern in Nebraska. So what this legislation does, it essentially is a solutions-based piece of legislation that says, okay, we're addressing these issues that have been raised. Now we need to move forward to capture the tremendous benefits for our country that this project provides. Big-time job creation, reducing our dependence on Middle Eastern oil. All right? So how does the bill work? Well, specifically what it provides is that 60 days after its passage, the pipeline is approved so that work can commence on the Keystone XL pipeline. That means 20,000 jobs. That means $7 billion investment starts right away. Then as to the Wyoming piece, state of Wyoming, together with the EPA and the federal government, worked through to reroute in Nebraska so that that portion of the pipeline is then approved once they've gone through their process and decided on the route that meets the concerns in Nebraska. So in essence, this legislation, again, it's about addressing the concerns, solving the problem, and moving forward. This incorporates the special legislation and the solution that's been put forward by the state of Nebraska. It incorporates it right into the bill and enables us to move forward. Now, I've referenced the tremendous benefits in terms of energy security, in terms of job creation, in terms of working with our best friend and ally, Canada, and reducing our dependence on oil from places like the Middle East and Venezuela. But let me address one other important point. Another point that's been brought up in opposition to the pipeline project is that the production of oil in Canada in the oil sand region produces CO2. And so that if this pipeline's built, then there'll be more CO2 released because of production in Canada in the oil sands and that product coming into the United States. But in fact, without this pipeline, we'll have more CO2. The point is with the pipeline, we will have less CO2 produced than without it. Let me repeat that. With this pipeline project, we have less CO2 produced than we have with it. Let me make sure I got that right. With this pipeline, less CO2. Without it, more is produced. Why is that? Let me go through it. Okay. If we don't have the pipeline, then instead of bringing that product into the United States, that product will still be produced. The production will still occur in Canada, but the pipeline, instead of coming into the United States, will be rerouted to the western border of Canada, and it will be sent to China. That means large tankers will be hauling the product to refineries in China. Now, the refineries in China produce higher emissions than our refineries. Plus, you've got those ships that produce CO2 as they haul all this product to the Far East. Furthermore, since that supply isn't coming to the United States, we have to continue to import product from the Middle East and also from places like Venezuela, as I've mentioned. So in essence, you've got super tankers bringing that product to the United States. So not only are you, in essence, now hauling the equivalent of 700,000 barrels a day around the world in super tankers and producing CO2 emissions there, you're also taking this product over to the Chinese refineries where they have higher emissions. My point is, the oil sands are still produced, aren't they, under either scenario. But without this pipeline, you actually have higher CO2 emissions on a global basis. So again, it is about addressing all of the concerns that have been raised with this project, and it does that. And at the same time, we create tens of thousands of jobs right off the bat. We create hundreds of millions in revenue for states and localities at a time when they badly need it. And again, we reduce our dependence on oil from parts of the world where it truly is an issue for our country and increase energy security. It is about common sense. It is about addressing all of the issues that have been raised. And I urge my colleagues to join me and the 37 sponsors and co-sponsors that we already have on this legislation to pass it and help put people back to work, help get our economy going, and help improve our national energy security. Mr. President, I thank you for that time. At this point, I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Acosta.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor to speak to an amendment, bipartisan amendment that my colleague from Illinois and I, Senator Kirk, have offered. We believe it is one of the most critical issues facing our country in terms of national defense and global security. And so we've come together to the floor to speak about it. One of the greatest, if not the greatest threat to the security of our nation and our ally, the State of Israel, is the concerted effort by the government of Iran to acquire the technology and materials to create a nuclear weapon that will do two things. First, we can be sure that it will alter the balance of power in the Middle East. And second, altering the balance of power with a nuclear Iran dedicated to the destruction of the State of Israel would most certainly lead to hostilities, hostilities that could spill over to engulf the entire region and well beyond. Mr. President, we cannot, we must not, and we will not let that happen. But the clock is ticking. Published reports suggest that we may be just a year away from an Iran having a nuclear weapon and the ability to deliver that nuclear weapon to a target. To forestall the scenario, more importantly, to prevent it from happening in the first place, we must use all of the tools of peaceful diplomacy available to us. Simply put, we must do everything in our power to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And I do not believe that there is anyone on either side of the aisle who disagrees with that proposition. So we come to the floor today to discuss a bipartisan amendment that I've offered with my friend from Illinois, Senator Kirk, to limit Iran's ability to finance its nuclear ambitions by sanctioning the Central Bank of Iran, which has proven to be complicit in Iran's nuclear efforts. This amendment, the Menendez-Kirk Amendment, will impose sanctions on those international financial institutions that engage in business activities with the Central Bank of Iran. It is a timely amendment that follows the administration's own decision last week designating Iran as a jurisdiction of primary money laundering. In fact, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network of the Department of the Treasury wrote, and I quote, "The Central Bank of Iran, which regulates Iranian banks, has assisted designated Iranian banks by transferring billions of dollars to these banks in 2011. In making these transfers, the Central Bank of Iran attempted to evade sanctions by minimizing the direct involvement of large international banks with both the Central Bank of Iran and designated Iranian banks." Close quote. And the Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, David Cohen, has written, and I quote, "Treasury is calling out the entire Iranian banking sector, including the Central Bank of Iran, as posing terrorist financing, proliferation financing, and money laundering risks for the global financial system." Close quote. So, Mr. President, the administration's own decisions clearly show that Iran's conduct threatens the national security of the United States and its allies. And the complicit action of the Central Bank of Iran, based on its facilitation of the activities of the government, its evasion of multilateral sanctions directed against the government of Iran, its engagement in deceptive financial practices and illicit transactions, and most importantly, its provision of financial services in support of Iran's efforts to acquire the knowledge, materials, and facilities to enrich uranium and to ultimately develop weapons of mass destruction, threaten regional peace and global security. We recently learned just how far down the nuclear road Iran has come. The International Atomic Energy Agency's report indicates what all of us already suspected, that Iran continues to enrich uranium and is seeking to develop as many as 10 new enrichment facilities, that Iran has conducted high explosives testing and detonator development to set off a nuclear charge, as well as computer modeling of a core of a nuclear warhead, that Iran has engaged in preparatory work for a nuclear weapons test, that in August IAEA inspection revealed that 43.5 pounds of a component used to arm nuclear warheads was unaccounted for in Iran, and that Iran is working on an indigenous design for a nuclear payload small enough to fit on Iran's long-range Shahab-3 missile, a missile capable of reaching the State of Israel. What more do we need to know before we take the next diplomatic step to address the financial mechanism that is helping make Iran's nuclear ambitions a reality? These revelations, combined with Iran's provocative effort in October to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States, demonstrate that Iran's aggression has taken a violent turn, and that we have every reason to believe that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it may very well use it, and use it against the State of Israel. This amendment would impose sanctions on any foreign financial institution that engages in significant transactions with the Central Bank of Iran, with the exception of transactions in food, medicine, and medical devices. It recognizes the administration's actions last week pursuant to Section 311 of the Patriot Act, designated the entire Iranian banking sector as a primary money laundering concern. It requires the President to prohibit transactions of Iranian financial institutions that touch U.S. financial institutions. And to ensure that we don't spook the oil market, transactions with Iran's central bank in petroleum and petroleum products would only be sanctioned if the President makes a determination that petroleum-producing countries other than Iran can provide sufficient alternative resources for the countries purchasing from Iran, and if the country declines to make significant decreases in its purchases of Iranian oil. So, Mr. President, this bipartisan amendment has been carefully drafted to ensure the maximum impact on Iran's financial infrastructure and its ability to finance terrorist activities, and to minimize the impact on the global economy. Iran has a history of exporting terrorism against coalition forces in Iraq, in Argentina, Lebanon, and even in their attempt to assassinate the Saudi ambassador here in Washington. And while Iran's drive to advance its nuclear weapons program has been slowed by U.S. and international sanctions, it clearly remains undeterred. Today, we take, hopefully, either today or tomorrow when we vote on this amendment, the next step in isolating Iran politically and financially. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues on the other side and with the administration to achieve this goal, and to also advance the legislation that I introduced earlier this year with many others on both sides of the aisle, the Iran, North Korea, and Syrian Sanctions Consolidation Act, which at this point has 80 bipartisan co-sponsors. Our efforts to date have been transformative, but just as Iran has been prepared to adjust to the sanctions and unanticipated loopholes, just as it has been prepared to take advantage of every loophole to circumvent the sanctions and keep moving forward in its effort to achieve a robust nuclear program, we must be equally prepared to adjust and adapt by closing each loophole and stopping the regime's nuclear efforts. By identifying the Central Bank of Iran as the Iranian regime's partner and the financier of its terrorist agenda, we can begin to starve the regime of the money it needs to achieve its nuclear goals. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan amendment that will go a long way to closing financial loopholes, to help prevent the Iranian regime from moving its nuclear ambitions to the weapons phase and closer to the warhead of a missile. We cannot, we must not, and we will not allow Iran to threaten the stability of the region and the peace and security of the world. And I appreciate my distinguished colleague from Illinois who is on the floor, who has worked with us in this regard, come to a common view and effort to maximize the effect on Iran, minimize the effect to both us and the global economy, and certainly urge passage of this amendment and yield the floor.